Madness.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
outstanding
That's
stuff.
one
Yeah,
example.
my God. So yeah, that drive, and I'm fascinated by watching these shows on television on PBS, nature and so forth, and how sex is at the center of their
Of so
very
much.
sex and the search for sex for food. That's all they
They
do.
predominate.
Their whole life is search for food, scavenging, grazing, and the search for
Hey,
sex.
you're live. It's all on.
Periods of what they call estrus.
Okay. So for better or worse, what am I going to say?
So what have you been doing since the last meeting of our
I have my son. My dad was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and it just so happens that my son followed Sandra Juan, who he and she had a child, Ruby, and she lived in Jersey City, and then she decided to move to Albany, and she moved to Albany, and he went there because of Ruby, and they have been co-parenting in that area for a number of years. And when he made that move, it was very difficult for him. He felt lost. He didn't really know anybody there, and he just felt quite depressed. Well, that kind of turned around when we were able to help him with some finance, and he bought a duplex and a house. And then he sold the house 9 months after he bought it for $280,000 for something like $420,000, sight unseen from a family in Portland who just made a crazy offer. He had the house on the market, and they were about $100 grand over what he was asking for some strange reason. In any case, he then turned that into a duplex and bought a fiveplex, and so he's been dealing with real estate, and he was always going to be an actor, and so that meant he was a caterer, and he didn't have the ganas, the drive to be the actor, but he continued to do catering, but he got very tired of that, and so now he's in real estate. So we went back to see his place and to spend time in October in the Berkshire Mountains, where the leaves turn color, and instead of 8-lane or 12-lane freeways, there's 2-lane undivided highways and not a lot of cars, and it's just such a pleasure to be part of all that.
and that's
So
a great
we've done it.
time to
His
be
birthday,
in the
and it's his birthday.
Yeah.
It's his birthday on the 14th of October, so we put that together.
that turning is starting to
Yeah.
occur.
Four Seasons is so special for a kid who's lived in California his whole life. I mean, we live in a desert, and the hardwood forests of the East Coast are something that we don't just see out here. We see a lot of cactus, but we don't see forests of that sort. So we enjoyed that a lot.
Do you think that contributes to the kind of flatness of personality? And maybe flatness isn't the right word. Maybe the right word is the kind of consistency of our Southern California personalities, that we don't have to go through seasonal changes. Because I remember as a student at Oxford, understanding for the first time why they had spring riots at Ivy League schools that were in cold climates in New England.
Okay.
Because it really was the beginning of something very different when you could go to class, leave your dorm room without a sweater or a jacket or an overcoat, for God's sakes, and for boots and so forth, to slush through the yard and go to class. And where we were at Whittier College, I think you could wear what you wore in September
Almost
for
any
the
other
whole
month.
year.
Yeah.
and
yeah.
not have to
80 or
not have to
90 at
alter.
Christmas has always been a
Yeah.
strange thing. Not a strange thing. It was normal for around here, but I always wished it was cooler. My favorite weather has always been a rainy day. I mean, I just rainy days and something cooking on the stove and maybe a good game on the television is
Because it was changed.
I've always craved that, and we went back there, and the high during the day at 52 is here. A cold day is 59. In the winter, when it reaches 59 as your high, you know you're in the middle of winter. Well, that can happen a lot of times.
What do you do if you're from Southern California and during the first fall semester at college at Oxford, you experience something close to 17, 18 days of overcast skies, and that was the beginning. That year there was my first experience with what I would call mild depression.
And the word depression is what I was going to talk about. I think that could be deadly.
And I had never experienced anything like that. But I was fortunate enough to realize that I could associate it with the weather.
It's not depression if you have a reason.
Yeah.
It's when you don't have a reason.
That's right.
That's when depression gets to be a health hazard.
Right.
Yeah.
And you understand a lot about your parents when you understand that you were born and raised in Southern California, but they were born and raised someplace else, and they may have switched moods on you. Irrespective of the weather, but that they were more accustomed to mood swings than you as a child of this constant spring.
I hadn't thought of it like that, but I think you might have a point.
I know that for a fact. Both of my parents were from Texas, South Texas and East Texas. A little bit of what we talked about the last time, and there was this kind of seasonal swing when we did certain things, ate certain types of food, and you couldn't understand. I couldn't understand, for example, my mom made pretty good stews, and I couldn't understand why we never had stew in the summertime, because stew was something that you had when it was cold outside.
That's it. Yeah.
And you had top coats and
So
gloves.
You got to be careful generalizing vacations, because on vacations, the tension and responsibilities that you have day to day are not there. You've got more time to savor and more time to enjoy, and if you generalize on that, you might be making a mistake. But I tell you, if we didn't have all our family in this area, I'd have a place in the Berkshires, and I'd have a place here, and I would kind of flip back and forth, I think, if I could now. My spouse has got something to say about that, and that it's very unlikely that would ever happen. But
I've always dreamed, and particularly in the last 20 years, of putting some type of living accommodations on the 160 acres in South Texas that I manage, the grazing rights and the oil rights.
So you've leased that out to people, have you?
And I've inquired about what kind of amenities I could get into, say, just a mobile home that what I could sleep in for a day or two or for a week, and that could accommodate other people and grandkids and so forth as a beginning of a gentleman's ranch, perhaps. And that's still very much in my mind.
Yeah.
And I've kind of pass those ambitions on to my sons, and they are interested. They want to build something on that property. Of course, they have to clear 160 acres of brush, and that's a challenge because the property has not been lived on since my grandmother
Okay.
left the property
Okay.
prior to
But you have the
and
deed.
during the Great
Yeah.
Migration of the
Yeah.
late teens
Oh.
and the early 1920s
Uh-huh.
of the previous century, which was 100 years ago
Yeah.
that anybody's ever lived on that property.
Yeah.
And it was also the place where that 160 acres was the place where my maternal grandfather died when my mom was only 4 years old.
And you said she sat on a nail? And
No, that was my paternal grandmother.
Oh, okay.
This was my maternal grandfather. He died of a
And
snake
so-
bite.
A snake bite.
A snake bite. At a time would have been like 1902, 1901, maybe 1900. I'm not quite sure. My aunt was born in 1899, and he's in the picture with her when she sits on his lap. So I'd say, and he died within months of that picture, I'm told. So it's like 1901 that he would have left this world by virtue of inadequate hospital and medical care. No one died of snake bites or jaundice, like in the case of my paternal grandmother.
Sepsis,
today.
probably.
Well,
Infection.
you had tetanus shots. We have urgent care in addition to emergency rooms, and if you can make it, and generally those in the urban area, you're never any further than 30 minutes away. You can take an antidote and reverse the effects of the toxin that those rusty nails and those rattlesnake bites inherit. So they left widows and widowers. My paternal grandfather, the late great Edward Sanders, was a widower. And as a result of that, he married twice.
And your brother
Again.
was Edward because of him?
He was named for his grandfather
Ah.
and his father.
Okay.
My father's name was Hayes. My grandfather's name was Edward. My brother's name was Hayes Edward. My dad, my granddad on my mom's side, who died of the snake bite, I know very little, and she knows very little about him. But something remarkably happened. That was remarkable. That happened 2 years ago when I visited the property as sort of an inspection for prior to entering into a license agreement with a group of hunters who wanted to
Okay.
wild boar
Yeah.
and deer and so forth that come across the property. The president of the County Historical Society is Frio County, Texas, just south of San Antonio, and found out that I was there in town. And while I pay the taxes and do all these other things and vote and so forth, as a property owner, not in a general election because I'm registered to vote in California, and give permissions and sign contracts and issue licenses and so forth of one kind or another to the school district and to the county and so forth and so on. They know my name, but they'd never seen me before. And so while I'm scouting the property, a pickup truck shows up, and it happens to be the president of the Frio County Historical Association. And he tells me after a little bit of conversation, I know where your grandfather is buried.
Oh my goodness. And you didn't know?
I didn't know.
Oh, my
I knew
goodness.
that he was buried somewhere.
Go figure that one.
In the area, that it was near a river, the McGill River, because that was called San Miguel Texas at the time, and that term is not used now. It's now called Charlotte, or it's called some other name, Aratosca, because that's the adjoining county, or Pearsall, which is the county seat for Frio County. But in any case, has now offered to show me that gravesite, which is part of an adjoining landowner's property. That is owned by a white family, a young professional man who has taken it on as a personal avocation of his to restore this little plot
the cemetery?
of headstones
Okay.
and make it a private cemetery for what he says is something less.
So he
than
said,
a dozen
your
people.
grandfather's buried here someplace, or
He's-
did he point to a stone?
No, I haven't seen them.
Okay.
I haven't seen
Okay.
it yet.
Okay.
Because he
Oh, it wasn't restored at the time that he was talking to you.
no, the conversation that
Oh.
we had actually followed my visit to the land,
Ah.
and I was back in California.
I got it.
So
Okay.
what he offered to do on my next trip there, which I haven't made yet, is to take me to that part of his property. He's got about 320 acres. That part of his property where he's discovered this cemetery,
Oh,
and where he has restored it. He's cleaned it up. He's raised, I understand, some of the headstones up. And so that, and he says that he's pretty sure that one of those, he said, a little work would have to be done to polish the top of it. But there's enough etching on the tombstone that with a little work and a little professional, further professional attention, he's sure that one of those is the headstone of James T. Cook, my maternal grandfather,
that's a great story.
Who-
You know?
died at least 100. Who died? If he died in 1901, would have died more than 40 years before I was born.
Closest I came to my grandparents on my mother's side was we visited Wisconsin in I don't know, years ago with my mother, and maybe not with my mother. No, maybe not. But we visited there, and we went to the cemetery and we saw their graves with the dates and the names and so forth, and on my mother's side.
And all of them would have been Norwegian immigrants.
Yep, all of them. Yeah, from northern Norway. My daughter just decided that she had heard about the area and the farm and so forth where her mother's mother and father came from, and she just visited there and was able to find the farm and talk to the people who are still there, and it was a great adventure for her. I very much would like to do that with her, maybe a road trip in Norway, maybe next year.
You've done Norway.
I have done Norway, but it was on a cruise, and it was fjords, and it was hitting the highlights, and the beauty is incredible, no question. And New Zealand also has a place that I can't name, but we were up fjords there with enormous waterfalls and so forth. I mean, the world has so much to offer. Yeah.
Can you remember anything about the appearance of the people in those ports of call during your cruise of Norway's coast?
What I remember about that was there had been a massacre. There was somebody who went to an island,
Right.
and it was at that time that the guy had gone and shot a bunch of
remember
people.
that, yeah.
And what I remember was there were these
School kids.
well, there were these
camp. It was a
can
summer
yeah, but they were mourning. The country was mourning this horrific event, and they had these, I don't know what they were. And I brought one home, and then it kind of disappeared. It was sort of like a
But the children
candelabra.
were of Middle Eastern
Were they?
background for the most part.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
lot, one of the problems in Scandinavia, Iceland, Denmark, and places, Greenland, where you have these isolated Anglo, they're either Anglo or Saxon settlements,
Okay.
is the lack of migration.
Oh, so
So they have a problem with
tolerating
inbreeding.
okay. Okay.
It's not diverse.
Okay. So
And so, one of the things I had dinner maybe 25 years ago with the then president of Iceland, and I said, what are you doing about the
that problem.
that the Mormon community in Utah has
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
inbreeding, and interestingly enough, one of the most prominent uh, uh, Mormons in the United States, Romney, Mitt Romney of the Romney family, and there's always a Romney who's a member of the 12 disciples, it seems, married a woman outside of the church. And so his kids have been fine. But that's a real problem for them, especially in rural Utah, northern Arizona, where there tends to be a lot of inbreeding between distant relatives of this kind of there's a word for the mental condition that that gets worse as the inbreeding continues. And one of the things that I was always curious about after this tete-a-tete with the president of Iceland was how Scandinavian countries combated that, because they're isolated by weather and by sea and by all sorts of things. And she said that they make use of the maritime ships that come to
Okay.
port.
All right.
In Reykjavik,
All right.
you know, the guys.
If you're a quick crew member,
might be
you might have a good day.
Hey, it might be. Your ship may have left from Genoa,
Yeah.
like Columbus
Oh,
500 years ago.
yeah.
But boy, if you're a man, you're welcome. And our girls would love to have dinner with you. You know, I said, and I was listening to this in disbelief.
From the president of Iceland.
She had hosted the Reykjavik summit between Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev, and so she was conversant with Western Atlantic politics, and she's telling me this in bold, candid language about how we keep our genetic balance. How we
I expected she wanted you to
address
come and
this
spend a couple of
impairment.
months.
Yeah, I mean, look, nature has this, and for me, it was instructive too about the current political issues in the United States with respect to immigration. Um, but I believe that nature, I believe, the science holds that nature thrives for
Diversity.
and that you hybridize a lot of plants, a lot of animals, and they're stronger than their ancestors. The products of those hybrids are stronger than their ancestors. I know, say for example, in Sweden, where I have spent some time, that they welcomed the Turkish immigration some years ago, but there's a tipping point at which it becomes too much,
Okay.
especially when the immigrants impose or
Starting
want to share
their
culture
customs, and they want
and their
they want to
customs.
they want to
And maybe that's what we are experiencing in the United States. I mean, I think those of us who know Los Angeles and Los Angeles County know that during the 80s, we went through the 1980s. We went through a lot of what other parts of the country are going through now, and we exceeded that tipping point. We've gone beyond it, but we've accepted that that is a part of Southern California culture now. We're not afraid of, say, Mexican food. We're not afraid of Mexican girls in our case, or in
No.
the case of girls,
I sleep with one.
Mexican guys.
Yeah, Christina. Yeah.
There is, but I mean, we're still getting used to it. But when I think about it, from say 20 years ago, I have a cousin who works at a company where the workforce went from 90% African American to 90% Latino. He's still with the company.